Devin won $11 million on a Tuesday. He remembers exactly where he was standing. A gas station, fluorescent lights, the cashier double-checking the numbers because neither of them quite believed it. 5 years later, Devin is broke. Not tight budget broke. Actually broke, no savings, a mountain of debt, and a lawsuit from a business partner who no longer speaks to him. Here's what most people assume happened. Devin went wild. Cars, mansions, parties, bad investments, the classic story. And sure, some of that happened, but that explanation, the one almost everyone reaches for first, is mostly wrong. Or at least, it's incomplete in a way that matters enormously if you ever come into money yourself through a bonus, an inheritance, a business sale, or yes, even a lottery ticket. The real reason lottery winners go broke isn't spending. It's infrastructure, or more precisely, the total absence of it. By the end of this video, you're going to understand the actual psychological mechanism that breaks down when money arrives suddenly instead of gradually, and why it has almost nothing to do with self-control. If you've ever wondered whether you'd handle it differently, you might be surprised by what actually determines the answer. Let's start with the concept underneath this. When wealth builds slowly through years of saving, career growth, or steady investing, it doesn't just build a bank balance. It builds something alongside it, a set of habits, decision-making systems, a stable sense of identity around money, and usually a network of people who've watched that growth happen and can offer grounded advice. Call it financial infrastructure. It's invisible, and it's the entire reason gradual wealth tends to stay intact. Sudden wealth skips all of that. The money arrives, but the infrastructure doesn't. It's like inheriting a mansion with no plumbing installed. The size of the asset has nothing to do with whether the systems exist to actually support it. You can put a person in a 10,000 square foot house, but if nobody ever taught them how the water system works, the size of the house isn't going to prevent the pipes from bursting. This is actually the pattern researchers have found across sudden wealth recipients, broadly not just lottery winners, but also professional athletes with short career windows, people who receive large legal settlements, and even beneficiaries of unexpected inheritances. The mechanism is the same, regardless of the source. It was never really about lottery tickets specifically. It's about the gap between the speed of the money and the speed at which infrastructure can form. So let's break this down into the specific mechanisms that actually cause sudden wealth to collapse. 5 of them. And notice how few have anything to do with recklessness. Mechanism 1. Scaling shock. This is simpler than it sounds, and more disorienting than people expect. If you've spent your entire adult life making financial decisions in the range of hundreds or low thousands of dollars, your brain has calibrated its entire risk assessment system around that scale. Suddenly, deciding what to do with an amount 1,000 times larger doesn't just mean more zeros. It means every internal reference point you've ever used to judge, is this a lot of money, is instantly obsolete. Decisions that should feel enormous start to feel normal, simply because the numbers around them are also enormous. A $100,000 loan to a friend can feel proportionally similar to lending someone $20, purely because the surrounding scale has shifted so dramatically. The brain doesn't recalibrate on its own. It requires deliberate, repeated practice, and almost nobody gets that practice before the money actually arrives. Mechanism 2. Identity mismatch. This one runs deeper than most people expect. Your spending habits, saving instincts, and even your comfort with saying no to people aren't just financial skills, they're part of your identity, built slowly over years of being a person with a certain relationship to money. When the money changes overnight, but the identity hasn't caught up, you get someone technically wealthy, still making decisions as the person they were before the money existed. Devin, 5 years after winning, still described himself internally as someone who got lucky, rather than someone managing $11 million. And that internal identity gap is enormously consequential because your identity is what governs your daily decisions far more than your bank balance does. A person who still thinks of themselves as financially precarious will make financially precarious decisions regardless of what the actual numbers say, because the decisions are being filtered through an outdated internal model of who they are. Mechanism 3. This is the one most people don't see coming, and it's often the most destructive: social obligation spending. When your financial situation changes suddenly and visibly, the people around you often expect it to change your relationship to them, too. Loans that feel impossible to refuse, Family members with sudden emergencies. Friends who quietly start assuming you'll cover the bill. Here's the part that makes this so dangerous. Saying no to any single request feels petty, disproportionate, even cruel, given how much money is involved. But no one warns you that these requests don't happen once. They happen dozens of times, from dozens of directions, and each individual yes feels reasonable in isolation, while the cumulative effect is catastrophic. Devin estimated, years later, that he'd given money to over 40 different people in his first 2 years as a winner, not because he was careless, but because refusing felt, each individual time, like the wrong thing to do. Now, here's where it gets worse. Because mechanisms 1 through 3 don't operate independently, they compound each other. Scaling shock makes large numbers feel small. Identity mismatch means you don't feel entitled to say no. And social obligation spending gives you constant opportunities to prove that by saying yes. Each mechanism removes one of the natural barriers that would otherwise slow the bleeding down. Mechanism 4. Absence of habit infrastructure. Gradually built wealth comes with years of accumulated financial habits, budgeting instincts, automatic saving triggers, a working relationship with investing, an internal alarm system that flags unusual spending. None of that exists for someone whose wealth arrived in a single afternoon. It's the financial equivalent of being handed the keys to a commercial airliner with 0 flight hours. The plane works fine. The person flying it has no trained instincts for what to do when something goes wrong, because nothing has ever gone wrong before at this scale. Worse, there's no natural feedback loop. Small financial mistakes, the kind that teach most people valuable lessons early, don't feel small anymore when everything is happening at a scale 1,000 times larger than anything previously experienced. Mechanism 5. Lack of protective systems. This is the quiet structural failure underneath everything else. People who build wealth gradually tend to accumulate protective relationships along the way. An accountant they trust, a financial advisor who's watched their situation evolve, sometimes simply the hard-earned skepticism that comes from having made a few smaller mistakes early, when the stakes were still low enough to survive them. Sudden wealth typically arrives with none of that protective structure in place. And worse, it often attracts people actively working against the winner, having any advisors who show up specifically because they've heard about the windfall, investment opportunities that would never have gotten a foot in the door before. Devin signed onto a business partnership within 4 months of winning, with someone he'd known for 6 weeks because he had no established relationship with anyone whose judgment he could actually trust to say, slow down. Let's put Devin next to a second, deliberately different case. Priya. Priya built a comparable net worth over 18 years through a steadily growing consulting business. On paper, at certain points, her net worth actually exceeded Devin's winnings. But Priya had 18 years of practice saying no to relatives who asked for loans, 18 years of watching her own spending instincts calibrate gradually as her income grew, 18 years to build a relationship with an accountant who'd seen her make small mistakes and correct them while the amounts were still survivable. When Priya's business had a breakout year and her income tripled, she didn't feel a sudden identity gap, because her sense of self had been adjusting in small increments for nearly 2 decades. Priya isn't smarter than Devin. She isn't more disciplined in some innate character sense. She simply had time, and time is what builds the infrastructure that money alone never does. None of this makes Devin foolish, or weak, or somehow different in character from anyone watching this. It makes him a case study in what happens to almost any human being when financial scale changes faster than psychological infrastructure can adapt. This is a systems failure, not a character failure, and that distinction matters enormously, because it's actually good news. Systems can be built deliberately, in advance, by anyone, regardless of their current financial situation. Character flaws, if that were really the explanation, would be a much harder problem to solve. So here's the part that actually matters for you, whether or not you ever win the lottery, because most people will experience some version of sudden financial change at some point. A bonus, an inheritance, a business sale, even just a significant raise. Here's how to build the infrastructure in advance, before you need it. First, practice scale shifting deliberately, before it's forced on you. Periodically ask yourself what a decision would look like at 10 times your current financial scale. This sounds abstract, but it trains the part of your brain that Mechanism 1 exploits, the part that loses calibration when numbers suddenly jump. Practicing the jump in your imagination, occasionally, keeps that calibration muscle from atrophying completely. The same way, a small amount of regular exercise keeps a much larger physical effort from feeling impossible later. Second, separate your identity from your current bank balance on purpose. Regularly ask yourself, am I making this decision as the person I actually am, with the values I actually hold, or as the person I used to be, out of habit? This single question interrupts the identity mismatch mechanism before it can quietly take over. It's a small habit, but it's the exact muscle that would otherwise atrophy completely if your financial circumstances ever changed rapidly. Third, pre-decide your boundaries around obligation spending before you're ever tested. Decide, in a calm moment, what you will and won't do for family or friends if your financial situation changed significantly. Write it down. Boundaries decided in advance, before the emotional pressure of an actual request, are dramatically easier to hold than boundaries invented in the moment, under social pressure, with someone standing in front of you. This isn't about becoming ungenerous. It's about generosity being a decision you make deliberately, rather than a reaction you're pressured into 40 separate times. Fourth, build habit infrastructure at whatever scale you're at right now. Automatic savings, a real budgeting system, a genuine comfort with reviewing your own finances regularly. These habits, practiced consistently even at a small scale, are exactly what generalizes upward if your financial situation ever changes dramatically. The habit matters more than the amount. Someone who automatically saves 10% of a modest income has already built the exact mechanism that would automatically save 10% of a much larger one. The system doesn't need to be reinvented, just scaled. Fifth, and this is the one people skip because it feels unnecessary until it's suddenly urgent. Build your protective relationships before you need them. Find a financial advisor or accountant you trust while the stakes are still small enough that a mistake wouldn't be catastrophic. That relationship, tested at low stakes, becomes the exact protective infrastructure that would otherwise be completely absent if your financial situation changed overnight. It's far easier to trust someone you've already worked with for years than to evaluate a stranger's judgment for the first time in the middle of the most disorienting financial event of your life. Devon's story isn't really about the lottery. It's about what happens to anyone when money moves faster than the systems built to hold it. And the uncomfortable truth is that most of us are one unexpected windfall away from discovering exactly how much infrastructure we actually have or don't. The good news is that infrastructure isn't about how much money you currently have. It's about habits and boundaries and relationships you can start building today, at whatever scale you're currently operating at, long before you'd ever need them to hold something much larger. Priya didn't build her infrastructure because she anticipated becoming wealthy. She built it simply by handling ordinary financial decisions consistently, for years, long before the stakes became large enough for it to matter this much. You don't need $11 million to start building the systems that would let you keep it. You just need to start before the money arrives, because infrastructure built after the fact almost never comes fast enough.